you again, Tyler and Mallory. That was beautiful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. James Emery White is founding and senior pastor of Mecklenburg Community Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. President of Serious Times, a ministry exploring the intersection of faith and culture, and you can find that at churchandculture.org. He's an adjunct professor of theology and culture at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where he also served as their fourth president. He has authored more than 20 books that have been translated into 10 languages. Mecklenburg Community Church began with a single family and has grown to more than 10,000 active attendees on multiple campuses. More than 70% of the church's growth is from those who were previously unchurched. Dr. White holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Public Relations and Business, an MDiv and a PhD degrees from Southern Seminary. He has also done advanced studies at Vanderbilt University, Oxford University in England, and served as a visiting professor at New Orleans Seminary. Also at Southern Seminary, Southeastern Seminary, and even Moscow Theological Institute. He has also served on the board of the Boston Theological Institute, which includes such schools as Boston College, Boston University, and Harvard. Dr. White and his wife Susan have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. James Emery White.
Some of that was true. I've long been intrigued by an obscure passage in the Old Testament scriptures. Almost a throwaway comment about a group of men within the people of Israel. They were simply known as the people and the men of Issachar. We don't really know a lot about them. Issachar himself was the 5th son of Jacob and Leah, the 9th son overall for the patriarch. He had 4 sons, and he went with his father into Egypt, where he died and was buried. Afterward, his descendants formed one of the tribes of Israel. By the end of their wanderings through the Sinai desert, they numbered over 60,000 fighting men. When the promised land was apportioned, the men of Issachar received 16 cities and their adjoining villages. Moses referred to him as a strong ass situated in a beautiful land. I think he meant it as a compliment. What is most evident is that by the time of David, they were then numbering about 90,000 people. They were known supremely for their wisdom. It was even noted in the Talmud that the wisest members of the Sanhedrin were always taken from the men of Issachar. Now here's what intrigues me. It was the nature of their wisdom, the dynamic behind it. And we find that in the first book of Chronicles, which simply reads that from the tribe of Issachar, there were 200 leaders. And these men understood the signs of the times and knew the course that Israel should take. Now that intrigues me. It's always intrigued me. They knew the signs of the times and then how best to live in light of those signs. That is a powerful and that is an important combination. First, the signs of the times. To know the signs of the times is more than headlines and tweets. It's knowing what is significant among the happenings of our world. Events and movements and trends and ideologies and currents and worldviews. It's knowing what is shaping us and forming us and molding us. There's just far too many churches and ministries that are trying to formulate methodologies and strategies and programs and initiatives, and they don't have a clue about the signs of the times. It's as if we know biblical exegesis, but we have no idea about cultural exegesis. But that's not all. The men of Issachar didn't simply know those signs, they knew how to live in light of them. In fact, knowing that is what made what to do so clear. They had a clear sense of what to think about, and from that, the manner in which to respond, the role their lives needed to play in light of the moment in which they lived. So knowing the signs of the times, and from that, how to then live, has to be the most pressing challenge facing any life, and certainly any ministry. And particularly now. Particularly right now. I believe we are living at one of the most pivotal moments in all of human history. One of the more intriguing observations about the flow of history surfaced in a very important essay written just after the Second World War, that was required reading during my studies at Oxford. It was written by a historian named Christopher Dawson, and in it he made the case that you could look at all of history from the time of Christ to the time of his writing, and he said you could divide it up into 6 identifiable ages in relation to the Christian church and faith. He said each one of these 6 ages lasted between 300 and 400 years, and each one followed a similar course. He argued that each one began and then ended in crisis. And the heart of each crisis, he put forward, was the same. You had intense attack by new enemies, both within and outside the church, which in turn demanded new determination and drive. Now, without that determination and drive, the church would have lost the day. Now, Dawson accounted for 6 such ages at the time of his writing. I believe we are now standing on the cusp of another. We are at the end of an age, and we stand at the beginning of another, what I've called a 7th age. And as Dawson noted, it is a time of great crisis that needs men and women of Issachar to understand the signs of the times and to know what to do. So what's going to mark this 7th age? What are the trends, the patterns, the movements, and most of all, what is the great crisis from within and from without that we should pay attention to? Well, there's a lot to choose from, isn't there? First, from within the Christian movement itself, you've got the expansion of Christianity southward in Africa, Asia, and Latin America that can only be called explosive. And with it, we have the new globalization of Christianity. Philip Jenkins argues that by the year 2050, only 1 Christian in 5 will be a non-Latino white person. And the center of gravity of the entire Christian world will have shifted firmly to the southern hemisphere. Now, the challenges that will bring are enormous, including the relationship between the Western and the non-Western church, which, if you know your history, has not always been an easy one. But make no mistake, they will soon be the ones sending missionaries to us. Another significant challenge is the continued rise of Islam, and whether Islam will modernize peacefully, or whether we'll continue to have what Samuel Huntington has called the clash of civilizations, which has so defined our world since 9/11. So will it be, say, the model of Indonesia, or will it be ISIS? Of equal global importance is what will lead China once and if Marxism falls, and many believe it stays outnumbered. Will it be an authoritarianism, a national socialism, a type of Buddhism, or will we see the powerful surfacing of the underground Christian church we hear so many rumblings about? Another major crisis to be reckoned with on a different front is the radical redefinition of the most foundational institution within creation itself, marriage and family. No longer is family defined as a male husband and a female wife, much less children. You have male with male, female with female, children with surrogates, multiple parents, polygamy, polyamorous unions. It's a new day where the very idea of family is being radically redefined. But even beyond family is the challenge brought to the very idea of what it means to be human. I've long told my graduate students that the Doctrine of Humanity is by far the most pressing doctrine of our day in regard to culture. It's the area of Christian thought that's most challenged by the world in which we live, and the one where we have the least to draw from historically. I mean, find something from Origen or Athanasius, Luther or Melanchthon, Barth or Brunner that speaks to stem cell research, or human cloning, or transsexualism, or artificial intelligence. As the first 5 centuries hammered out Christology and then later generations tackled everything from the Holy Spirit to Revelation, ours must be the day that is going to reckon with the doctrine of humanity in ways that hopefully will serve the church for decades to come. But I haven't even brought up the most profound cultural challenge of all. The most profound cultural challenge of all, I am convinced, is the one that accompanies all of these and more. It's the cultural context itself. And here it is. The great crisis of this 7th age is that there has been a second fall. Now, the first fall, as many of you would be familiar with, led to God's expulsion of human beings from the Garden of Eden. The second fall was when we returned the favor. In our world, most people lead their lives without any sense of needing to look to a higher power, needing to look to something outside of themselves. Leaders of science and commerce and education and politics, regardless of their personal convictions, have ceased operating with any clear reference to a transcendent truth, much less a God. Now, this is a new and profound break with the history of Western thought and culture. I mean, even among those times and places that might be termed pagan, secularity that we're experiencing today was unknown. Because whether it was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the gods of Greece and Rome, there were gods. There was something you looked to outside of yourself. No one would have thought to begin and end with themselves in terms of arriving at truth or morality. No more. The second fall changed all of that and now shapes the world in which we live. Now, I know at first glance you may not think this has happened. Theists outnumber atheists across the global board. But something like atheism isn't at the heart of the second fall. It never has been. So the rantings of someone like a Richard Dawkins or the late Christopher Hitchens are largely irrelevant. Philosophical atheism is not at the heart of the secular religion, and it's not the principal challenge to Christian faith. The heart of the secular religion is a functional atheism. Rather than rejecting the idea of God, our culture simply ignores him. Or as one survey concluded, people today aren't merely secularized. It's not like they're thinking about religion and rejecting it. They're not thinking about it at all. Which is why we now talk about the rise of the nuns. The nuns are the religiously unaffiliated. When asked about their religion on various surveys and polls, they don't answer Baptist, Presbyterian, or Catholic, or even Protestant. They simply say, I'm nothing. And their numbers are rising faster than any other group. When I completed my book on their rise, the nuns made up 1 out of every 5 Americans, which made them the second largest religious group in the United States, second only to Catholics. And they also were the fastest growing religious group in the nation. They are now the largest religious group, and they're still the fastest growing. They now constitute 1 out of every 4 adults in the United States and are quickly encompassing about half of all young adults. So where have the nuns gone? Nowhere. I mean, that's the point. There's no shift from Christianity to another religious brand. There's just the abandonment of a defined religion altogether. Those who used to say they were simply unchurched, they're just dropping out completely. And we're finding they're getting increasingly secular. It used to be that the tagline for a nun was spiritual but not religious. Well, they're quickly getting less spiritual, at least in terms of formal spirituality. They may be spiritual-ish, but in terms of believing in God or prayer, it's an ongoing, continual decline. So is the Christian sky falling? Not globally. Christianity is on the rise worldwide, particularly in the global south. Christianity remains the world's largest faith, and the most distant projections to the year 2050 has it maintaining that lead, barely, but maintaining it. So it would certainly be correct to say that rumors of Christianity's death are premature. But here in the United States, not so good. The stunning rise of the nuns throughout the West is real. It cannot be ignored. And that nothingness that they are embracing is what is shaping our world most profoundly. So who within the world has it shaped the most? That's easy. The youngest generation. Generation Z. I know some of you are still trying to catch up with Busters or Generation X, which followed the baby boomers. Some of you leapfrogged over all of that and went straight to Generation Y or the millennials, on whom marketers have been focused for at least a decade. I can tell you there's actually 6 living generations right now in the United States, but I don't want to add to your stress. Start paying attention to Generation Z. You may not know this, but they are numerically the largest generation in modern history. They're bigger than any other generation. Bigger than boomers, millennials, bigger than all of them. And they're growing in cultural force. By 2020, they will account for 40% of all consumers. Generation Z will not simply influence Western culture, they will be Western culture. They will constitute Western culture. So who falls into Generation Z? Well, essentially, they're those born between 1995 and around 2010. It's the generation that is now collectively under the age of 25. And I could give you many characteristics of this generation. For example, they're recession and terror marked. They have never known anything other than the era of war on terror and the era of the Great Recession. They are deeply Wi-Fi enabled. While baby boomers can't remember a world without television, millennials can't remember a world without computers, Gen Z doesn't know a world without constant, immediate, convenient access to the web. In other words, they've never known life without a smartphone. This is the first generation, which is also truly multicultural, multi-generational in terms of their cultural DNA. It's normal for them. They're also sexually fluid, meaning they are sexually and relationally amorphous. They reject all sexual labels, are convinced that sexuality should be set free of any and all restrictions and allowed to follow its desire moment by moment. But the most defining characteristic of all is that they are post-Christian. Generation Z is arguably the first generation in the United States that will have been raised in a post-Christian context. And as a result, they are the first truly post-Christian generation. Yes, most people in Generation Z still believe in the existence of God, barely. There are twice as many atheists in their ranks than in the population at large, so they're outpacing. There's twice as many. But even among those who do believe, when you ask them, okay, now define this God for me, explain this God to me, and talk about how you relate to this God, and they start telling you, it is a mess. It's just a mess. This generation is largely unchurched. They have few, if any, religious leaders as role models. They are spiritually and biblically illiterate. Let me put it as bluntly as I know how. This is a lost generation. They're not simply living in and being shaped by a post-Christian cultural context. They don't even have the memory of the gospel. They've never encountered God, experienced God, at least not by name. There's a spiritual vacuum in their life, a hole. They're left to feel the sickness of the world's disease without a narrative and without a story, without a transcendent meaning or purpose. They have a crisis in values, finding themselves needing them and not having them, and divorce from any means of finding them. There's a lack of vision. There's nothing calling them upward to be more than they are beyond themselves. They have empty souls. They're not plagued by the first part of Nietzsche's famous claim when he wrote, God is dead. Go back and reread his essay. It's what he says next that's most profound. Because after he says, God is dead, he says, and it is we who have killed him. And then he says, how shall we, the murderer of all murderers, ever comfort ourselves? For Generation Z, the question is, how shall their children comfort themselves? I mean, they live in a world that murdered God, and they're feeling it. And they have that hunger and thirst for the spiritual. Frederick Buechner tells of a story of a boy, 12, 13 years old, in a fit of crazy anger and depression, got hold of a gun, and he shot and he killed his father. When the authorities asked the boy why he had done it, he said it was because he couldn't stand his father. Because his father demanded too much of him. His father was always after him. He hated his father. Later, after he'd been placed in a house of detention, a guard was walking down the corridor late one night when he heard sounds coming from the boy's room, and he stopped to listen. And the words he heard, the boy sobbing in the dark over and over again, were, I want my father. I want my father. Buechner observes that the story of the boy is a kind of parable for our lives. We've killed off our father, and now we feel the emptiness that it brings. Imagine how Generation Z must feel growing up in that fatherless world. Now, why do I bring all this up? For this context. Because they don't have to be orphans. You do know you can kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight, don't you? Let me ask you a question. What is the most important, strategic, life-changing thing you could ever do for another human being? I mean, if you really wanted to make a difference, if you really wanted to impact their life, you could become an educator and teach those who are illiterate how to read. You could go to medical school and become a doctor and heal the sick. You could enter politics and work to pass laws that protect the vulnerable and serve the poor or bring justice to the oppressed. You could start a food kitchen and feed those who are hungry or malnourished. You could join the military and you could defend freedom wherever it is threatened around the globe. All of these would make a ferocious difference. And all are important. And we need people investing their lives in every single one of those ways and countless more I could mention. But they're not the greatest thing you can do for another human being. Not even close. Not even close. They're not what makes maximum impact on another life. What makes the maximum impact on another human life is when you are involved in bringing about the intersection of their life with the living God through Christ in such a way that the entire trajectory of their eternity is altered. That's maximum impact. And when you do, and you introduce them to Jesus in such a way that they're invited to give their life to him, oh my goodness. But the average person who considers themselves a Christ follower never talks about their faith with other people. I was telling Larry earlier, a recent statistic. You ready for this? 90% of all Christians in America will never share their faith with anyone else in their lifetime. 90% of all Christ followers in the United States will never open their mouth about Jesus to another person in their lifetime. We need EvanTell's. We need EvanTell's. This is a celebration of 45 incredible God-filled, God-used years, but it's warm-up, friends, to the challenges that lie ahead. Which is why I unashamedly can tell you, is supported with everything you've got. Your time, your prayers, your resources. Not just because every life on this planet, no matter what the circumstances of their life might be, would be better if it had Christ at the center of it, and every life would be. Every life would be better if it could experience real liberation from guilt and shame that comes through even a single drink from the well of grace Christ offers, and through that experiencing the forgiveness of sin. Every life would be better with a deep and clear sense of true north in navigating what's right and wrong, true and false, good and bad. Every life would be better with the pulsating energy of the Holy Spirit coursing through their veins, changing and transforming them from the inside out into someone who is more loving and more joyful and more peaceful, and more patient and more kind and more good and more faithful and more gentle and more self-controlled. Every life would be better experiencing the new community that Christ came to establish, where you can love and be loved and know and be known and serve and be served and celebrate and be celebrated. But that's not the real reason. I'm going to give you the rawest part of the passion of this for me. The biggest reason is because heaven and hell are real, and real people go there. I know we don't like to talk or think about hell. You don't want to hear about hell. But let me just ask you something. This is coming from someone who didn't become a Christian until they were 20. If I believe it's real, and real people go there based on where they're at relationally with Christ, how much would I have to hate them not to tell them? How much would I have to hate not to tell them? That's why Jesus talked about hell. He wasn't trying to beat people up with it or tell everybody they were going there because they were bad people. He wanted to talk to them about it because he wanted them out of it. It was a rescue operation. He knew it was a real place where real people go, people with names and faces and families, and he didn't want a single one of them there. And this drove Jesus' life. It consumed him. He talked about it nonstop, every chance he could. And he never let up on this. This went through every teaching, every message, every conversation, every action. Which is why he thundered out to people, who needs a doctor, the healthy or the sick? I'm here inviting outsiders, not insiders, an invitation to a changed life. Your Father in heaven doesn't want to lose even one. I came to seek and save the lost. Let me talk to you about lost coins. Let me talk to you about lost sheep. Let me talk to you about a wayward son. And if you have any doubt about the passion of Jesus on this, just remember the last moments of his life. Hanging on the cross in excruciating pain, bleeding to death, suffocating to death. What was he doing with those last precious moments? He was working to save one more. Even then. Don't tell me this isn't the heart of God. Don't tell me this isn't the heart of God. So Larry, I want to thank you publicly for your faithful service. All of you here supporting and partnering with EvanTell, thank you for yours. And may the resolve and sacrifice and generosity and vision that has brought us to this point continue on. Because it's Christ's passion. It's Christ's mission. And we desperately need the work of EvanTell. It's decisive to our day. If you know the signs of the times and know how best to react. The post-Christian world, the rise of the Nuns, Generation Z. Take that concern, be concerned, but channel it to change the world. And how do you change the world? Win it. Win it. And I don't know of anything that's more raw and unfiltered and pulsating with energy, laser sharp, focused on that, than what we're celebrating here tonight. And so it's my honor to be here, to say thank you, and to say to all of us here, get behind this, friends. Get behind this. I don't know if anything or any organization is doing what they're doing. I just don't. And I get around.